Okay, I think we will get started with the next part of our program, which is very exciting to me. I think the history is a great thing, and hopefully we learn from it, but especially the Titanic. And we have Christina Landis here, who is Buddy's daughter. Buddy plays the bass in our little band, and he's my twin since we share the birthday. So his daughter, Christina, it's great to have her here. And you're with the Quakertown Historical Society. Are you the president, or are you the... Ah, Titanic International Society, wow. And I'll let you say more of that, but Buddy said, would you like to have someone come and talk about the Titanic? I'm like, yes. So this is lovely. I'm so glad to welcome Christine. So.
Hello. So as she said, my name is Christina Landis. I am just a person who loves history. And Titanic, one of my first memories is when they actually found the Titanic, September 1st, 1985, when I was 4 years old. I remember seeing the boiler picture on the television. And it's pretty much become an obsession of mine. It's just something I've always enjoyed. So I've learned a lot about it. I've gone to different museums. There's one in Branson, Missouri. There is one in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. There's another one inside of the Lux in Las Vegas. They actually have what is called the Big Piece. So in the late 90s, they brought up a giant piece of the hull of Titanic, and that is in their museum. And in Orlando, there's another museum that has the little piece of the hull of Titanic. But to start off, this is Titanic, 1912, going off to sea. She looks just like Olympic. The main way you can tell the difference is the big windows in the back are all open. Next slide. So here are your choices for first class. You can have a suite, which is a sitting room, a sleeping room, sometimes a little dining area. There were a couple of first-class suites that actually had little, like, porches off of the room that they could go out and have breakfast or tea in. But that's going to cost you a pretty penny, about little over $133,000 today. Now, the first-class berth is only about $4,500 today, but it's just basically your sleeping quarters with a little seating room. But you still had a first class ticket, which means you had access to all of the accommodations that were on the ship. And this slide actually isn't working for me right now. It's showing you the smokestacks, and in the front you could see the whistle. In about 2008 or 2009, they brought one of them up from the bottom of the ocean. They fixed it up, and they actually did put air through it, so you could hear what the Titanic sounded like. Now, this is a real picture. This was taken by Father Brown. Most of the real pictures of Titanic that you see are going to be by Father Brown. He had a newfangled camera that he wanted to try out, and he had a first-class ticket and was just all over the ship taking as many pictures as he could. So this is an example of a first-class berth. So you have a little bit of a seating room, a nice bed to sleep in, and all the beautiful woodwork that was all hand-done, and everything was brand spanking new. And this is an example of a suite. This is specifically Ida and Isidore Strauss's suite. They were the owner of Macy's. And this just shows how they had more of a seating area. They had a lovely fireplace. There's a lovely little mantel clock on top of the fireplace, and that actually was on ship's time. So every time, as they were traveling across the Atlantic, they get into a different time zone. There was one master clock where they would change the time, and it would change it on all the separate time pieces throughout the ship. that were connected to it, and this was one of them. And today, even at the bottom of the ocean, the clock is still on the mantelpiece. And this is the lovely little courtyard piece that you could have if you had a first-class suite. There was only not 4 or less of these available on Titanic. And this is the first-class lounge. You would have come in here if you were waiting to go to dinner, or if you were just wanting to sit and chat with the ladies or the gentlemen. During the day, there was always music being played, and it was often played in the first-class lounge. Oh, good, it did come up all the way. So this is the grand staircase. This was first class only. So the very top is, if anybody's seen the Cameron movie, you've all seen Honor and Glory. That's what this is right here. But it came down a whole bunch of different levels, and only first class passengers could use these steps. And at the very bottom of each step was a brand new material that they were just trying out, called linoleum.
Was the music live music, or was it?
It was all live music. And just a nice little picture. Now, there are actually no existing pictures of Titanic's grand staircase. All of the pictures that you see that say about Titanic's grand staircase, those are Olympic. And the Olympic was in service until about 1934, when she was then dry docked, dismantled. And actually, they auctioned off all of the insides. There's places you can go over in Europe where you can get, you can sit in places that have all of the woodworkings and that. And here's your band. So these are the main gentlemen that were on the band. All the way to your left is Mr. Wallace Hartley. He's the one that has the famous violin that sold for over $1 million at auction. The case that the violin was in actually just sold at auction for about $642,000, just for the case. Why the case and the violin are not together is beyond me, but that's how it is. Everybody remembers about, the band played until the very end. A lot of people remembering the last song being Near My God to Thee. And it was so important that the company that sent the band on the ship felt, well, we're going to send all those band members' families an invoice for their uniform. And these are doors that would have led into the first class dining room. To me, it's just that little extra piece of detail. They were wrought iron, and there was glass in them and the beautiful chandelier, but just your introduction to go eat was extravagant. So this is a real picture of the first class dining room. It's not a great picture. It's many years old, of course, but you could see all the beautiful handwork on the posts and the ceilings. And it's kind of hard to see, but on the tables, the napkins are folded perfectly. There is an astronomical amount of silverware to figure out how to use. And many, many glasses that I don't know what all they were drinking. After you're done with dinner, the gentlemen are going to go into the smoking room, have their cigars, their liquor, talk about things, business, politics, whatever was the topic of the night. But even a room that was meant to just be men had beautiful finishing touches, and the glass and the ceiling pieces and everything, again, is all brand new. They had leather seats that were all brand new in there as well. This is a real picture of the reading and writing room. We do not know who the lovely lady is sitting there reading, But this is the first class's reading and writing room. There was a reading and writing room for second class, but this one is just for first class. Now, as a first class passenger, you also have access to not only the lovely dining hall, where the night Titanic sank, I believe they served 12 courses. And you could also go to the a la carte restaurant if you wanted something different than 12 courses, maybe something smaller, or you wanted lunch, or you're not wanting to wait until like 8 o'clock at night to eat. The Veranda Cafe is another option that first class passengers had. I believe this is the one that was quite popular with the ladies. They'd like to go have a cup of tea there, things of that sort. Again, only first class passengers. And your third dining option, the Cafe Parisian. So this, again, was another place mostly the ladies would have likely have gone to have tea or to just sit and chat with ladies, have a little snack or something of the sort. So this is the inquiry office. So if you wanted to use one of the amenities that was on the Titanic, you had to go to the inquiry office and actually buy a ticket. And that ticket was timed. Everything was done separately. But again, it's only first class. Also, if you had some things that were valuable, if you didn't have a room safe, they could hold them as well. You could also go there to see about sending a Marconigram on your trip. Grab a newspaper. There actually was a newspaper that was printed on the Titanic that was just about all things basically White Star Line in general. So here is one of your first class accommodations, a gymnasium, which had the rower there, as you can see, and the gentleman in the back is actually sitting on a mechanical horse. There was also a mechanical camel, and those two pieces, if you were a first class child, you were fortunate enough to be able to ride one of those. But it was always separated. The men used the gym at a specific time, the ladies used the gym at a specific time, and then the children had their own time to use the gym. You had a fresh salt water pool. And the joke that everybody always likes to say is, the pool is still full. It was the first salt water pool on a ship. And it was only about 6 foot deep at the deep end. Again, it was timed. The men were allowed in the pool, and then the ladies were allowed. It was very separate, but first class only. You also had the Turkish baths. You want to go sit in a sauna, get a massage, relax, kind of like what you would think of a cruise today. That's where you would go for that. The tiles of the Turkish baths, some of them have been brought up from the ocean. A lot of them are intact, actually, and they are absolutely beautiful. And the gentlemen even had a barber shop that they could use. First class gentlemen only, of course. The ladies, of course, would have had a lady's maid or would have done their own hair, or maybe their sister or mother or somebody else would help them with it. And this is just one of the promenade decks that you could walk around as a first class passenger. You can see the deck chairs all along the side. You did have to pay an extra fee to use those. It was $1 for the entire trip to use a deck chair as often as you would like. Just another view from a first class area, actually looking up to a second class area, because even second class did not share with third class. Second class was totally separate. And this is one of the iconic pictures that a lot of people have seen from Titanic, the little boy spinning the top. They even portrayed this in the James Cameron movie. The little boy makes it off the ship, however, he is killed in a car accident about 2 years later. So then, if first class is a little bit too much for your pocket, maybe you want to go second class. Second class, you only have one option of a room. You pay your ticket, they give you what they consider their second class amenities and finishings to your room. So this is a second class room. This picture was taken by Father Brown. They actually did have a little sink in their area. And some of the rooms had 2 beds stacked. Some of the rooms had 2 separate beds. Some of the rooms had 4 beds. So it was kind of a little bit more of a luck of the draw with your ticket, depending on how many people you were traveling with. They would have kept all ladies together, especially single ladies would have been in a room away from any single gentleman. And this is an example of a second class menu for breakfast. They had many things to choose from. One of the best things about the White Star Line at the time was the food. They had French chefs on board, Olympic and Titanic, and even the third class people felt like they were traveling second class or better. They said they've never eaten so well in their life. Second class was treated as first class in any other liner, and first class was just above and beyond. So here's your second class dining hall. You can see a little bit of difference. The woodwork is not quite as fancy. The tables are nowhere near as fancy. The chairs are not probably quite as comfortable as they had in first class, but it's still quite nice. They also had their own smoking room for gentlemen, which I believe was right near the library. And this is a second class library. So their library was totally separate from the first class library. They had their own books, their own area to write, look at things, so on and so forth. And here's your second class staircase. It's still very beautiful, but instead of using the brand new linoleum, you get carpeting. But still very detailed. You can see there's a little piano in the corner there. If it was not being used by the band, anybody could really play on a piano on the Titanic. Some people had said about they remember little girls trying to practice while they were on the ship. So this is what it would have looked like if you wanted to walk the decks as a second class passenger. You had the lifeboats on the deck with you and extra chairs. They could also rent a chair. They weren't as nice as the first class deck chairs, again, but they could also rent deck chairs. Now, does anybody know who this lady is?
Annie Funk,
Yeah, so this is Annie Clemmer Funk, and as long as I've loved Titanic, I always thought, boy, what it would have been to been a relative of somebody. And when I moved out to the upper Perkiomenville Valley, when I was doing research on the home that I moved into, I came across an article of Annie Clemmer Funk. And I thought, boy, that last name Funk sounds very familiar. Went home, pulled up my genealogy website. She's my 4th cousin. So Annie lived in Palm. She was a Mennonite missionary. She studied at the Westchester Normal School, which is now just Westchester University. And then she also went to school in Massachusetts to learn about more missionary style work. She grew up in Palm. Her father was a deacon at their church, which was Hereford Mennonite Church, which is now Butter Valley Community Church. He was deacon there for about 25 years. And he ran the mill that was right near her home. I believe, yes, this is Annie's home. It's on Tollgate Road in Palm. And Doesn't look like this today, actually. It looked like this about a year ago. Today, I went past it a couple of weeks ago. They took all of the plaster off, and I think they repointed the stone on the house, and they left the stone exposed, and it is gorgeous. However, all the pictures I've seen of Annie and her family with the house always had plaster on the outside of it. So this is the Town and Country article that I was saying about. Her brother, she was not supposed to be on the Titanic, first off. She was over in India on mission. She was to get a furlough later in the year, but then received a telegram from the pastor saying, you need to come home, your mother is very ill. We have booked you passage on 2 ships. So the first ship took her, I guess from, where's that? I think the first ship actually is the one that took her over the English Channel. And then when she got into London, she was supposed to be taking the Haverford. And Haverford, there was a coal strike in 1912, and the Haverford was going to be delayed. It was not going to be leaving until April 16th. So Annie thought if she added a little bit money to her ticket, she could get onto the Titanic. It was also going to be her birthday. So maybe it was a little birthday treat or something like that. But then she had to get from London to Southampton to board the Titanic. And that is where she boarded. There was an Annie Funk that was on the lists that were released after the sinking, but it was on a supplementary list. She was not on the first list because she wasn't one of the original purchasers of a ticket. She bought it at the last minute. She was just trying to get home to her ill mother. And there is a family lore or local lore that Annie had given up her seat in a lifeboat to a mother and a child. Of course, nobody's ever really going to know exactly what happened, but Annie did not make it off the ship. Her brother was in disbelief and actually lived over in New Jersey and kept going over to New York to White Star Line offices trying to get answers. Eventually, White Star Line sent out the Mackay Bennett to recover some bodies, and she was not among any of those either. So in India, the small building here at the bottom, that was a school that she had built. She had in her first year 14 girls in the school. And after she passed on the Titanic, the larger school was built in her memory. And it's not used today. It was used until about the early 1960s and has actually kind of collapsed since then, but it still has an exterior wall that I'm not sure if it has or not. A lot of sources say there is a plaque there, but I've also seen a source saying that the plaque has been returned to Butter Valley Church in Hereford. And this is the stone that was erected for Annie in the Hereford Mennonite Cemetery. It's right there, Route 100, almost in Bartow. And that stands today, and it's right there with her mother and her father and all of her family that was in the area. Then we move on to your third class ticket. Third class was a lot of immigrants leaving Europe looking for a better way of life, meeting up with family, something of the sort. So even, $1,000 today, that's a lot of money to go move your entire family, take as little as possible because you couldn't bring a whole lot onto the ship, pack up your lives and head on out. And they let you know that you were third class. You still got better treatment than in other shipping lines. But to me, that staircase just looks like they're letting you know you're going down into the dungeon. But they still did their due diligence. Single ladies were kept at the total opposite end of the ship. Third class went all across the entire bottom of the ship. So they would keep the single ladies totally separate on the other side of the ship from any single gentlemen. And the single gentlemen were actually lucky enough to get a straw mattress to sleep on. So it was much lesser accommodations, but if you were a single man, it really sounds like you really didn't get the nicest treatment. But this is a typical third-class cabin. This was likely for a family that was going. They still had a wash sink in their room, but the entire third class had 2 bathtubs to share amongst the entire third class passengers, which in itself was over 1,000 people. And here's the third class dining hall. Again, you can see lovely woodwork, but then you also have air ducts in the way, and the posts look more just metal instead of wood. The chairs don't really look like they even have much padding. It goes down little by little, but you can definitely tell the separate 3 classes, and that was normal for life back in 1912. It's not normal today. You know, you can buy an expensive ticket if you won the lottery, and you don't, what they used to call new money back then. But that was just the way of living back then. So they had a common room that was just lined with some benches. There was often bowls of fruit on the tables for people to have. There was a piano in there as well. None of the band ever came down to second class or third class, but there was a piano there if somebody knew how to play the piano. One of the survivors that was in third class actually said that the party in the James Cameron movie, when he takes her down to third class, was an actual party that happened down there. So you had high class drinking the finest wines, and then you had a party down in the basement. So it was exactly 11:40 ship's time, which would have been about 9:40 Eastern time, when she struck the iceberg. There are many different legends and stories about exactly what happened. I think all it was a clear night. There was no waves crashing up against the iceberg to make it easily seen. And there was actually an aurora borealis that night, so they might have been distracted. If she would have hit it head on, possibly could have stayed afloat until New York. Would have taken a few extra days to get there. But your first instinct and what the officers are trained to do on the bridge is avoid. So they turned. Couldn't quite turn. She's a big ship. She was going about 22 knots, which is about 25 to 28 miles an hour. And it just took too long to turn her. So she actually stayed afloat for about 2 hours and 40 minutes. That was a lot longer than they had anticipated. They had anticipated that she would stay afloat about an hour to an hour and a half max, and that was from Mr. Thomas Andrews, who was the head engineer for White Star Line. And about 2:20 a.m. ship's time, or 12:50 p.m. here, that's when she slides about 2 miles deep into the Atlantic Ocean. She does split in half. There was a lot of controversy when the sinking first happened. All of the crew said that she went down in one piece. And that is in both the American and the British inquiry. All of the crew stated that she sank in one piece. I don't know if they were afraid of something with insurance or it would damage their name more to say about how she did break apart. But it's very, very clear that that is what happened. And this is just a picture that was taken from the Carpathia once they got to the Titanic survivors that were in all the lifeboats. So you had a total of 499 passengers that survived. 212 of the crew survived. About 60% of the surviving passengers were first class, 42 second class, 26 third class. But even that number of 212 is only about 25% of the crew that survived. There was a lot more crew on the ship. She was able to hold over 3,000 people. There was plenty of the lifebelts to go around for everybody on board. And she actually did have enough lifeboats by maritime law at that point. So at that point, lifeboats were not meant to be what we think of today as a lifeboat. You sit in it and you wait for rescue. Ships back in 1912 were supposed to be close enough to each other that one ship would get the call, the CQD or the SOS, and would come and they would ferry the passengers using the lifeboats from the one sinking to the one that came to save them, which is why they didn't need enough lifeboats for every single person on a ship according to maritime law. They were only ever meant to be a ferry system. So this is why there was enough, but not enough at the same time. But the Titanic tragedy really made it so that maritime law today is accurate. There is a seat in a lifeboat for every single person on board. You have to do safety drills. You'll have to learn where your lifeboat is that you are supposed to go to and things like that. It's better organized. Also, for the night of the sinking, as they're lowering these lifeboats, they were on new davits for the time. And the davit is the part that is like an arm that the rope goes through to lower the boats down to the ocean floor, which is a good 10 stories below you, up on the boat deck. And they had trouble with those. That's why they show in the movies there was one boat that was about to come down on top of another, because that's really what happened. They didn't know what they were doing. Earlier that day, they were supposed to do a drill with the lifeboats and the davits and all of that, and they never did it. Nobody knows why they never did it, but they never did. So this is the New York Times article for the sinking. It's pretty accurate. There's, a lot of people that they didn't even know were on board, because from the time they purchased their ticket to the time White Star Line got all the information of everybody that was on board and people who had canceled. Milton Hershey was supposed to be on the Titanic, but his wife took ill while they were in Europe, so they decided to stay longer. J.P. Morgan himself was supposed to be on Titanic, but he decided not to journey. So a lot of different circumstances. I'm not even sure for 100% that the first list that they sent out were correct. They tried to get a list of names once they loaded upon the Carpathia, and the Carpathia wasn't even heading to the U.S. The Carpathia was going back to Europe. It had just left the U.S. So it really went out of its way. But you also had the problem of the telegrams that were going out at that time. You could get a piece of one telegram and a piece of another telegram, and you could put these things together so they don't exactly work. And that's when you get articles like this. And this was an actual published newspaper. There was a miscommunication among all the telegrams that are coming in, and somewhere along the line it got goofed up that all the people on Titanic were saved. And this is just a picture of the bow as it sits at the bottom of the ocean today. She is deteriorating, of course, but being 2.5 miles down, she has on her not just rust, but what they call rusticles, which is actually a living organism. And it's literally eating the ship, even more than a rust would. Within about 500 years, give or take, there will be nothing left at the bottom of the sea floor. There's a lot of different views on should we go and rescue some more items from the bottom of the ocean? Should we leave it alone? Is it a grave site? And then you also have things like the whole Titan submersible last year. And that was a nightmare. If you are deep in with the Titanic community, you knew right away what happened. Because there was already reports out from PJ, who was on the Titan, saying about certain things that were an issue for him. It wasn't going through the proper channels of inspection. It was a doomed mission to begin with. It had a few successful runs, all the way down, all the way back up. But to get that far down, it takes about 3 hours. And the implosion sound that was caught on military microphones was about 2.5 hours in, hour 45 minutes to 2.5 hours in. They never even reached the Titanic. So it's extremely sad, and I really hope that they learn from this, that these things really need to be thoroughly inspected and vetted before they let people dive down this deep. People have been diving down that deep for a very, very long time, ever since Dr. Ballard found her. To get down that deep, you actually have to have weights on whatever you're in, submersible. And people were actually dropping the weights when they got deep enough, but they were right at the Titanic, so it was actually hitting the Titanic and was damaging the Titanic. So then they had to create this weight field, basically. So if you go down, you have to drop your weights at a certain GPS point, and then you could go over to her. And as you're doing that, you could likely run into her. It is that dark. You do not see her until you are literally on top of her. And it's happened where ships have run into her and things like that. And but that's where she is. And luckily, we do have some things to remember her by. A lot of the survivors who didn't want artifacts brought up changed their mind because they realized that once they're gone, what else is going to tell your story? We don't have many pictures. There's no more survivors. The last survivor passed away May 31st, 2009. And she was only 7 weeks old when she was on board. So it's a tragic tale, but I find it fascinating. And I actually try to just remember her as a whole, as she was on top of the water with all the luxury, dreaming of being a first-class passenger, walking down the staircase to lovely music and everything like that. I just can't imagine what that must have felt like. To them, it was probably nothing, but to me, it would be the world. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So all the black and whites are Father Brown's pictures, correct?
Correct.
Are there any other pictures that any other survivors' families have yet today from the original? Do you know?
There was another family that had gotten off in, I believe it was Queenstown, with Father Brown. Father Brown was actually asked to stay on the ship, and he called into the ministry, and they said, no, get your butt back here. So he got off at Queenstown, and this other family got off at Queenstown that he had made friends with, and they were taking photos themselves. I can't remember the name of the family off the top of my head, but their photos and Father Brown's photos are the only ones in existence of the actual Titanic.
Okay, so he never had to get to one of the lifeboats. He was off the boat before it's not.
Yes, he left ship in Queenstown, Ireland, which was the last stop that the Titanic made before she went into open sea. Any other questions?
How long did it take to get from Ireland then to the U.S., or would it have taken?
They left Ireland on the 11th or the 12th, and they weren't supposed to be there until the 16th or 17th. So it was about a week to get from one to the other, and this was one of the faster steamships out there. So the Olympic was able to go back and forth at about the same speed, and they never fully lit all of her boilers, so she could have easily have gone more than 22 knots. Any other questions? Yes.
Now, I didn't see the Titanic movie, but I'm wondering, did they say in that movie anything? I wish I could remember his name. I thought his first name was John. There was a fellow on that gave his life. He was in the water, and he was telling people about calling out to Jesus. And he was like a missionary, and people were saying, came back and said how that he was, but he gave his life then for them. Now, I don't know, do you know who that person was?
I'm sorry, I don't know who that is.
It's a very interesting story.
What I have heard is that a lot of, the lifeboats, they went as far away as they could because they didn't want, when the Titanic went down, they didn't want to get pulled in. So they were far away, but from what I've heard, basically every single lifeboat was praying for everybody that was in the water that night. Basically, hardly anybody, if anybody, drowned that night. The water was about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Within about 5 minutes, hypothermia sets in, and you'd be lucky to see 10 or 15 minutes after that. So, drowning was really not a thing. It was all just freezing to death, unless they didn't have their life belt. But like I said, there was plenty of those to go around. So.
I wanted to say another thing.
Yes.
We always hear, they said the Titanic was unsinkable. And maybe they were too proud, maybe they gave too much confidence in what would happen and didn't prepare for anything like this.
And that's actually one of the myths. White Star Line that built Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic never, ever said that they were unsinkable. That was all the press. That was all the press had actually titled them unsinkable. White Star Line always just said about how they had their watertight compartments and things like that. So unlikely to sink is something that they said. That got turned into unsinkable for the press. Even back then, they liked to fiddle with things. Yes?
Is there a marker somewhere out in the ocean that kind of designates that as like a memorial area? And because I'm assuming it's international waters, who does someone have to go through to get permission to dive down?
So there is no marker there because they can't keep it there. We keep floating away. But the GPS coordinates of the Titanic are readily available. A lot of people just go out there to lay a wreath or flowers or say a prayer, something of the sort. But no marker. And it's actually, I'm trying to think of the name of the company. It is National Waters. So the name of them is evading me right now. But it is an organization that you have to go through Oceanic. You have to go through Oceanic to get permission to go down to the Titanic. And there is lots of permits involved in doing such, especially if you wanted to retrieve anything from the site. And the bow is almost a mile away from the stern. The stern is in deplorable shape. It was shred up when it came down to the bottom, and the bow is only the way that it is because it came down like a bullet and just slid right into that ocean floor. It's kind of hard to tell from a picture, but from the front of the bow, there should be another 2 or 3 stories there at least of ship. That's all just buried down deep. Yes?
You mentioned some passengers could send a Marconi grant.
Yes.
Is that some sort of overseas radio or?
It was the telegram of the time. Marconi was a new device, Titanic being one of the very first ships to have it on board. So you could go and purchase a telegram, which ended up being a Marconi-gram, with them trying to be smart with marketing. Anybody else? No? Well, thank you very much for listening. I have a display up here that you are all welcome to come up and look at and touch if you want. I made a life belt that was, I used the measurements from one of the actual life belts, the one that Madeline Astor wore, is in a museum, and you're able to get the actual measurements of it, and I used that to make this. I didn't fill it with cork. The original ones were filled with cork. Cork is quite expensive, so I used styrofoam. This is just a beautiful model of Honor and Glory. These are all replica pieces. It's a replica newspaper, so if you want, you can even look at that, pick it up. There's a Vinola soap bar. They remade the exact soap that they put on the Titanic. They were one of the biggest sponsors of the Titanic. They put their soap on all 3 sister ships. There's a piece of coal there that is from one of the earlier expeditions. And I have a splinter of deckwood. But I know it's legit deckwood with the authentication that goes with it of how they got it and everything like that. So, and this is a replica of first-class dining hall dishes. So these were not in the cafes or anything like that. This was strictly dining hall, what they would have, looks like they would have used.
I did think something else too.
Yes.
In the movie, they talk about steerage, but that is third class.
That is third class. Steerage is third class. I don't know where the name comes from, but I'm assuming because back in the day they used to have to go down there and row, paddling, something of the sort. But thank you, everybody.
So did anybody learn anything today? Fascinating. I can't believe it. I mean, I didn't know a whole lot about the Titanic, but my goodness, that's just incredible, all that information. And that you're related to somebody, to Annie. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, again, I would say come up and take a look. And you have something else you're doing?
So according to my calendar, Mother's Day is coming this Sunday. And so ladies, if you're a mom or if you've been important in the life of somebody as a mom, aunt, grandma, or other influence, we'd like you to take a gift today. These will be by the camera. So you are welcome to any and everything that is in the basket.